Welcome to the show, Aviation Sports Talk up and rolling. It is Monday. Welcome to a brand new week, along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. We are little programming note right off the top. We're shaking the week up a little bit in terms of like how the week usually goes with our shows. We usually do the midweek mailbag on Wednesday because it's the middle of the week, but we have a special guest coming up on Wednesday's show. So the mailbag's going to be tomorrow. Vince and I will do the mailbag on tomorrow's show instead of Wednesday. So be prepared. Come ready. Mark is asking about the College World Series and the two Coastal Carolina coaches getting ejected. We will touch on that in rapid fire. We have the audio from the Coastal Carolina head coach who got ejected, and so you'll get to hear his explanation of the chain of events. Were you able to watch that live by any chance, or have you seen any of the stuff since then?
I've seen live. I've seen hour 2 post. I never saw the post game interviews though.
Yeah. So I got the post game interview from Kevin Schnall, the Coastal Carolina coach. We will hit that hard in rapid fire, along with a lot of other stuff in rapid fire. But we had so much fun doing 2 words for every Notre Dame defensive player last week. We said, hey, let's do some offensive players this week. So today's show, you have 2 words to describe every Notre Dame. Well, not every, but, 2 deep.
Just about.
A lot of guys on there. Tommy wants clarification. First, he says 2-word adjectives again. Okay, Tommy, feel a little snark in that comment. Sean, please clarify at the beginning whether or not the word "the" can be used as one of the words. Can't let Jesse get away with a bit of wordplay. Now, "the" is a word. I know I used it maybe 3 or 4 times last week. I tried, as I went through the list of guys that we're going to talk about today, I tried not to use "the" today. I don't know if you did, but "the" is a word. So what do you want to do? Do you want to count it? Do you want to not count it?
So I need to be honest with everyone here.
You're not prepared for this show, are you?
Neither was I last week. And so that's why, some of my answers are prepared. Some of my answers are on the spot. You draw the line of which is which, but
I think you're going to have a hard time if you didn't prepare, because I went through, I felt like doing the offensive players was a lot tougher than doing the defensive players.
I thought the opposite.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
I thought offense is much easier. And so last week I really hurt myself. I'm a now seasoned vet in this game. I now understand the ground rules, what people are looking for here. I kind of went more or less last time on attributes, and then I kind of realized we were getting into more maybe like analogies. And so mine are much more fun this week. They started to get fun towards the end of last week once I said, once I knew the game we were playing a little bit.
Gotcha.
But I feel like the offense, I'll be much more prepared and have some words ready. But yes, I am majority just spitting bars.
Michael says just freestyle 2 words. That's all you got to do. There are a couple that I really had to think about. I don't know about you.
Well, it gets really hard when you're doing like 7 offensive linemen, because what difference is there between 7 offensive linemen? But
big physical.
Yeah.
Big physical.
You cannot, and that's the issue I was running into last week defensively, is like I couldn't use the same word for the same guy. And then
I did use the second word. I did duplicate the second word a couple times. You'll see when we get there. But I tried to keep it as fresh as possible. I don't think I have any these in quote unquote the like the answer, the man, the
Listen, if
whatever.
Ohio State counts it, we can count it.
True. Very true. Good point. All right. Let's start with the quarterbacks. We're going to go right off the top. Kenny Minchey is numero uno today. What do you got? 2 words. Kenny Minchey. Everybody knows the rules. 2 words.
Silent assassin is my name for Kenny Minchey because I think Kenny Minchey is flying underneath the radar. In spring practice, a lot of the focus of the spotlight was on Steve Angeli and CJ Carr. I think Kenny Minchey is a really talented quarterback who still stands a really good shot to be the starting quarterback come first game against Miami. So I'm going to go silent assassin. I think he kind of moves in silence, moves in the shadows, keeps his head down, and works hard, but doesn't have to deal with that pressure of the spotlight like CJ Carr is getting.
That's good. I like that. And I had my initial thought was something along those lines. That's what was tough because this is a quarterback competition, and like CJ Carr, who we'll get to here in a second, obviously is the presumed starter. Well, what does that make Kenny Minchey? Like 1A, 1B, like that whole kind of thing. I just went with like who I think Kenny Minchey is. And I'll talk about what Justin said here in just a second. I went pocket passer, plain and simple, because I think that there's a lot of assumption that Kenny Minchey is going to be like the next dual threat quarterback if he's the guy out there. Kenny Minchey can run, but his running is the benefit, not a feature. That's how I kind of look at it. Like he can run, but he's not going to be Riley Leonard. It's not going to be run first. With Riley Leonard, running was the feature. With Kenny Minchey, it's the benefit, not the feature. Minchey's greatest asset is still arm strength. We got to see that in the blue gold game. And like he can get himself out of some trouble with his legs, but he's not going to be a run first type guy. He might not even be a run second type guy. He'll do it if he needs to. See, Justin Kane says arm talent, and I think he's got amazing arm strength. Arm talent is more a descriptor, I think, of CJ Carr than Kenny Minchey. Like Minchey might have a little bit stronger arm, but like Carr, like the arm talent is like just the ability to make all these throws off platform and like where you can, without even thinking about it, like you can drop down into a 3/4 slot or a quarter, like some of the stuff that we saw him do this past spring. But I just went with straight up pocket passer because, again, not that Kenny Minchey is going to be confined to the pocket, but he is more that than what Riley Leonard was with the running game. He can run. He's got good speed, but he's a passer first. He's more an overall quarterback first. So that's why I went with pocket passer.
It's hot when my contacts are just bugging out.
Your contacts are melting.
Yeah.
In your face right now.
It's so humid. My contacts are just not having fun.
All right. Sorry about that. How about CJ Carr? What are your 2 words for him?
Gunslinger. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. A lot of what you were just talking about, the ability to make a lot of different throws off different platforms, and really just the mentality that he has. I think he wants to be a gunslinger. He wants to fit, passes into tight windows and push the ball downfield and make those kind of what I would say wow plays at the end of the day, right? And I think that's ultimately going to be a challenge for him this season. He has to be able to play within the confines of what he can do, what this offense is asking of him, and more specifically what Marcus Freeman is asking of him. We know Marcus Freeman likes a quarterback to kind of be that game manager, don't turn the ball over, know when to hit your layups and that sort of thing. But I just see a ton of arm capability in him, and so my word's going to be gunslinger.
All right. Yours is gunslinger, and it's interesting that Toons has popped up his comment when he did, because mine is deserved acclaim. because there are a lot of assumptions that people are in love with CJ Carr because of who his grandfather is. And Toonsis says Lloyd's grandson, and there are a lot of people who think that way. But Lloyd Carr, obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, but you don't get to where you are because of that, though. Like you don't get to where CJ Carr is because of that alone. It would have been one thing if he had gone to Michigan and he was there. Like I can't imagine what all like the Nepo legacy kind of stuff would be like if CJ Carr were at Michigan instead of Notre Dame. Like he's at least cut his own path. He went a different direction. And I mean, you talk about kind of like a lightning rod direction that he went. He's got all that stuff that you talked about. He's got the arm talent, like I talked about. He's got great, like between the ears, like the gray matter. It's all there. He is where he is, though, because of the work that he's put in both on and off the field to get to this point right now. You can tell this is a guy who's been crunching film and breaking things down for a long time, just with the instincts that he has and, and the play, obviously, that he has on the field. So I think it's deserved acclaim right now, but I don't think it's going to be long until it is earned acclaim because it obviously takes getting out there on the field in games to actually earn it. We'll all get to see it, but I think he's going to earn it pretty quick. Now, that's a good point, though, too. It's just not a knock because kids raised by coaches usually know the game well. I mean, he wasn't necessarily raised by his grandfather, but he was raised by a guy who played quarterback at Michigan as well. So, all right. So those are the only two quarterbacks that we're going to do because we got a lot of other players on this list. How about Jeremiah Love?
This was hard to. I think you could use a lot of words for Jeremiah Love, but I went lightning in a bottle.
That's three.
Nope. The middle word is
that's actually four. Two words.
I gave it to you.
Lightning bottle. Okay.
And the reason why I say he's a lightning bottle is just every time he touches the ball, he has that ability to strike like lightning, quick, explosive, versatile, and kind of like lightning, unpredictable at the end of the day. You don't know when he's going to hit, but he has the capability to hit at any moment. And his lightning can be defined as speed, both vertically and laterally. It can be described as, jumping over someone, running through someone. He just has all of those kind of lightning moments where you're just like, wow, and so, and thank you, Justin, because bottled lightning is my two words that I was looking for. But
if he's bottled, doesn't that mean like he can't get out, he can't get it loose?
No. That means he is ready to be let loose at any moment, and you don't know when that moment is going to come.
Okay. I thought this was tough just because we've all seen Jeremiah Love so much, and we've all seen what he can do. So, like, to find two words that are somewhat unique, like I thought about missile and, something to do with speed and, all these different things. And I just went physically freaky, because – look, there's a national perception that he isn't physical, and hopefully that was dispelled. It should have been dispelled with the 2-yard touchdown run against Penn State, but still see a lot of that in the analysis of Jeremiah Love, though. That somehow this guy isn't durable, that somehow he's not physical enough. Well, Jeremiah Love had 711 yards after contact last year. That was the most of any of the Notre Dame, like ball carriers, basically, that led the Irish. 4.4 yards, almost 4.4 yards per carry after contact. He can run by you. He can run over you. He can go through you, around, all this different stuff. So the perception that Jeremiah Love was not physical enough, or maybe like that is an area where he's lacking. Like he's probably not, Ashton Genty or something like that, like with as physical as Ashton Genty runs, but he also doesn't have to be because he is so fast. I think he's got a different a gear that Ashton Genty doesn't have. And of course, he's got a great offensive line in front of him as well. So physically freaky because, like, not only is he physical, but he's obviously got the speed that you talked about, that lightning speed to go along with it. Are you in on that?
I'm in on that.
Okay. How about Jadarian Price?
I had something I wanted to say on this, but I didn't want to get yelled at. So I'm going to go with ultimate wingman for Jadarian Price. I wanted to say Batman to Robin or Robin to Batman, but that's 3 words, would have gotten yelled at. So I just went with ultimate wingman because that is what Robin is to Batman. He's the ultimate wingman, and it's like yours and Vince's beloved Top Gun. Goose is Maverick's ultimate wingman at the end of the day, and I think every lead back or every lead guy needs a wingman, and that's nothing against Jadarian Price. He's still very good at what he does. But I mean, we just all know that Jeremiah Love is the lead back in this room. And again, he's going to be Batman's Robin at the end of the day, right? Like, that's what I think of Jadarian Price. And he's still very good, freakishly athletic, but, his moment will come. Jeremiah Love will at some point move on. I think Jadarian Price will move into that kind of 1A slot out of the 1B slot. But for right now, he's Batman's Robin, or, as I said, the ultimate wingman.
He could easily be the number 1 guy. Like for a lot of other teams, he could be the number 1 guy. But I think that it's a perfect situation for both of these guys that they have each other so that they're not taking a million carries during the season. Like what Mike was talking about here a second ago when we were talking about Jeremiah Love, the fact that Love put up 1,100 yards and 18 touchdowns as a player who wasn't the full-time running back. That's a pretty good season because even, like, they played 16 games, and like, think about the fact that he was hurt for the last 4 of them, or, really the last 5 of them, if you consider USC as well. But we're not talking about Jeremiah Love right now. But Jadarian Price was also able to contribute significantly over the course of the entire season and during that playoff run as well. And, again, like, Price would be the number 1 guy at a lot of different places. My 2 words for him are home run, because he can house it anytime he touches the ball. Now he had 22 runs of 10 plus yards last season, and 10 plus, of course, for running back is considered an explosive run. 2 less than Jeremiah Love, 3 less than Riley Leonard. And when you look at their carries, Price had 120 carries. Riley Leonard had 184. Jeremiah Love had 163. So he had fewer carries than either one of those guys and was only a couple explosive runs behind them for over the course of the entire season. And he also averaged 4.5 yards after contact last season. So similar to Jeremiah Love, he obviously can run through some contact and run around you as well. But Jadarian Price, legitimate home run threat every time he touches the ball, and that gives you 2 legitimate home run threats every time they touch the ball. So pretty valuable. That a lot of value they've got in that backfield. How about Aeneas Williams?
So Aeneas Williams, I went with Sturdy King. I think that the reason I'm going with Sturdy King is he's a shorter guy, but he's very compact, very sturdy, and still a lot of overall athleticism when you talk about Aeneas Williams, a guy who can, take snaps in the backfield. He's also a very good, proficient, screen catcher, can catch the ball in the backfield. But, I think what a lot of people don't realize, and maybe what they did realize after the Penn State game, he can line up in the slot and really knows how to run routes at the end of the day as well. So I just think of him of just being this shorter, compact kind of running back. And again, like a more sturdy version of Kyren Williams, just a little bit stronger, a little bit beefier, that kind of situation. So I'm going Sturdy King for Aeneas Williams.
Sturdy King. Where did the king come from?
Because he's the king of sturdiness.
King of sturdiness. Okay. Not King Sturdy, Sturdy King. All right. Piggybacking on what you're saying, I went with valuably versatile because of all those different things. He can run it out of the backfield. He can line up in the slot and go catch a pass for you. He can catch it out of the backfield. He can do a little bit of everything. And the versatility that he brings, I think, is going to help both of those guys. And potentially maybe we see a little bit more 21 personnel this year. Who knows? They're going to have a lot of weapons. They're going to have a lot of things to figure out. But like Williams, when he's on the field, that's not just to like, okay, now you relax because this guy's not going to touch the ball. Maybe he surprised some people with some of that last year. But because of both the size and the speed and the soft hands that he had, I've said it before, that catch that he made against Penn State was not an easy catch to make, and he made it look relatively
Well,
easy.
it's a big part of his scouting report. Not only can he run routes, but he will win contested balls.
Yeah, exactly. Stymie. I don't know if I like this. Scattaboo 2.0. I think he's leaner than Scattaboo for one
he's
thing,
definitely leaner.
And I also think he's faster than Scattaboo. He did put the laughing emoji on there, but yeah, I think he's going to be I think he's going to be a better back by the time it's all said. He's probably not going to get the same attention, but what's that?
I said I.M. Tenzin is reinforcing kind of my point as well. This is kind of where the sturdiness comes from. He never goes down on that initial contact.
Right. He can do like some of the same things. Like he can run it between the tackles, or he can flash out and catch a pass and pick you up 20 or 30 yards. He can do a little bit of both, like a little bit more built than either the two guys in front of him. But he looked a little bit trimmed down what we got to see him in the spring as well. How about Kedron Young, guy we didn't get to see a ton of last year, but a guy that a lot of people really want to see more of?
Yeah, so obviously it's a little bit harder for some of the guys that you don't have as a lot of playing time, but when kind of reading about Kedron, looking at some of his film, I guess what stuck out to me is he's a functional freak at the end of the day. Like he's just his overall athleticism. He's got physical traits. He's got patience. He's got awareness. He's got really good speed. The ability to change speed really well. He's elusive. He's a bigger guy. So again, I just put a functional freak because he's got all the traits, right? And so, and I just think that makes him super, super freaky at the end of the day. The speed, the power, the vision, the patience, the soft feet, all of it. He's a functional freak.
We got Battle Ram. We've got Thumper. Only one word. Abrams Tank. I.M. Tenzin says that's a good one. Mike says the Beast. And there was one other one. And then I.M. Tenzin also said just Tank. No second word necessary. Kind of along the same lines, I went with Young Bulldozer. And they just posted all the updated heights and weights with the summer enrollees as well on Notre Dame's website. And they've got Kedron Young listed at 5'11", 242. That is a load of humanity I would not want to have coming at me at 5'11" and 242. He could lay that lick on you. And I'll be really curious to see what kind of role he can earn this year, because like J1 Sider talked about the fact that maybe you go with your top two guys a little bit more than what Dylan McCullough has done with, divvying up the 8 jobs and all that different kind of stuff. So I'm really, really curious to see what Kedron Young will be able to carve out this year, especially considering he has Kedron Young in front of him on the depth chart as well. Now we go to the offensive line. Mike said, Kedron, why did he put on the 20 pounds. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to see him. I'm going to guess it's pretty good weight if he put it on. I'm assuming if they, like to bulk up like that, they're not going to want him, to be a guy who's lost a step and a half by putting that on. I'm assuming that they want that kind of guy. Yeah, I am Tenzin over 2 years. Bettis 2.0, says Josh. Now we go to the offensive lineman. I think this is going to be
The hardest
interesting.
part.
These were some of the toughest ones. And I'm looking at what I wrote down for some of these guys. Okay, let's start with Anthony Knapp.
Okay, Anthony Knapp. I start off with Fearless Warrior for Anthony Knapp because I think it takes a lot of stones and guts to be a guy who start getting their first career start on the road against Texas A&M, and not be a liability at the end of the day. Yeah, he could have played better. He wasn't perfect, but he still did a job, and Notre Dame won at the end of the day. And I think, again, in order to be in that situation, you have to be fearless and to play tackle. I think he's ultimately, undersized at the end of the day. So that's kind of where I'm getting the Warrior at. He's undersized. He has to make his first career start in a very hostile environment, at the outside tackle position, the blind side tackle position. So, again, I just a lot of fearlessness and a lot of warrior traits in order to accomplish all that. And not only that, but he did it throughout the entire season. And, as guys kind of got healthy or bounced around, Anthony Knapp just kind of continued to plug away and do his job.
I went with hyper analyzed, and a lot of it has to do with the kind of stuff that is going on in the chat right now. Rudolph's boy, and like all this different stuff. Okay, no, I am Tenzin coming on strong. He says All-American. He was a freshman All-American last year. And I mean, all the stuff that you talked about was not easy to do as a true freshman, to be able to come in, start on the road, your first career game at left tackle and play left tackle all season long. Was he perfect? No. Michael says wrong position. Okay. Like, I don't think that just because Anthony Knapp is playing left tackle that all of a sudden, like he's being favored by some reason. Like, he played out there for a reason. Marcus Freeman likes Anthony Knapp just as well as Joe Rudolph does, maybe even more so than Joe Rudolph. So like everyone wants to point the finger at the offensive line coach. I can tell you there's a lot of discussion that's going to go into who those top 5 guys are who end up out there on the offensive line. And like we saw Charles Jagasaw, have you like we butcher his name all the time, and we'll talk about him here in a second. But Anthony Knapp was very overanalyzed last year. His play did get better as the season went on.
Why are so many people down on him? Like, they went to a national championship and he played, like, no one expected him to be perfect, but someone had to play the position last year.
Right.
And he was the only guy that stepped up and did it.
He did not get on the field because of favoritism last year. It was going to be Anthony Knapp or it was going to be Tosh Baker. Like, those were the 2 choices, and everyone was, I remember like a couple weeks before the season started, like everyone was sweating that it was going to be Tosh Baker. Nobody wanted it to be Tosh Baker. And then it's Anthony Knapp. And of course he ends up being the guy who's, criticized all year long. I've said it before, like if you grade him on the curve, he did a pretty good job last year. Now the curve is off because he's not a true freshman. And they're not just going to throw him out there because he's, somebody's quote unquote favorite guy. So we'll see how it goes. How about Billy Schrouth?
This one was tough. I really want to use 3 words here, but I know that'll be frowned upon. I wanted to say next man up, but that's 3 words. And so in order to get down to 2, I'm going to go void filler. And the reason why I'm going to say he's the void filler is because there's a pretty big void on Notre Dame's offensive line right now. And I think Billy Schrauth has to step up to the occasion and be the guy who fills that void. You had a lot of right now, Notre Dame is in flux. A lot of the older talent obviously hit the transfer portal, and a lot of the younger talent stuck around and is going to, who's going to compete for some of these starting offensive line positions. And I think Billy Schrauth has every opportunity in front of him, and I think he needs to fill that void along the offensive line. This is now his third year at Notre Dame, and in a room that has a lot of inexperience or a lot of younger guys, I think Billy Schrauth needs to step up to the table and be a leader.
Okay. I went with big bulldozer is what I went with for Billy Schrauth. And like when you look at, Mike says not elite, he's good. He is. But he's also got a lot of upside still because like when he came in last year and took over that left guard position, that's when Knapp, like you started to see improvement there, so like what was going on next to Knapp over the course of the season, as well as the experience that Knapp was gaining as an example, like those were all factors in how things were playing out over there. But Schrauth is a bulldozer. He solidified that left side of the line. And I think that, only 300 pounds. Mike says he's only 300 pounds. I don't know if you've ever stood next to him, Mike, which I have. He is not a small dude by any means, but he is a physical guy, and I think that when you look at just about everybody on this offensive line, that's a trait that's going to carry through. Is the physical nature that he has and the physical nature that he plays with. How about Ashton Craig?
I'm still struggling on this one, so you take the lead.
So I went with returning force because this was tough. We only got to see him in 3 games last year, and like you talk about another guy, who plays with some physicality. I feel like that is Ashton Craig, a little bit bigger. He's only 311 pounds. He's only 11 pounds bigger than Billy Schrauth, so I don't know how physical he can be. But I feel like this interior offensive line of Billy Schrauth, Ashton Craig, Charles Jagasaw, like that can be as destructive as an interior offensive line as we've seen in quite some time, like across college football. Like Quentin Nelson was obviously his own thing, but like those 3 guys. And so Craig is a force. I mean, it's ultimately the reason Pat Coogan was expendable and he decided to go to Indiana to continue his career. So like, I think this offensive line has another level it's going to go to with Ashton Craig coming back this season.
This might be bold, but for Ashton Craig, I'm going to go star awaiting. And the reason why I say star awaiting is because I think a lot of the talent or a lot of the discussion naturally goes to Anthony Knapp, Charles Jagasaw, Emil Wagner, Billy Schrauth. Ashton Craig really hasn't had his moment so far yet. He's been here relatively the same amount as Billy Schrauth, just had to deal with a few more injuries. But I think what really gets me excited about him is I honestly think he's got one of the better, ceilings compared to maybe Billy Schrauth or some of these other guys along the offensive line. He's got great explosiveness. He's tough. And I think the number one thing you see about Ashton Craig is he loves to finish plays. He's a guy who's always playing hard through the whistle. He's seeking out that contact, and he wants to drive you, into the sideline, into the ground, wherever it might be, and just, really finish off the play. So I think he's a star awaiting and really going to shine this year and ultimately kind of help, like you were saying, that interior between Jagasaw and Billy Schrauth kind of hit that next level.
I agree. That's very well done. Good recovery there. All right. So how about Charles Jagasaw?
I'll keep this one short and simple. I put Stonewall. I think he's a wall, and I think his hands are made like stones. And good luck getting around him because he's very physical, he's very athletic, and he's just obviously tremendously strong at the end of the day. And if I were looking to build an ideal offensive lineman, Charles Jack, like if I was on, create a player on Madden or college football, and I was trying to build an offensive lineman, a lot of it would look like Charles Jagasaw, and it starts again with his frame and stone hands.
Yeah, Swandong is saying Stonewall is 2 words. Technically, it's a compound word, so I guess we can allow it. Stone. Well, not actually. I don't think it is. Like to stonewall is 1 word, but there is also stone wall, where like stone is the adjective.
I just never knew that Irish breakdown would turn into a high school
a grammar
English
lesson. We're going to be diagramming sentences here pretty soon. Mike, staying surly here today. Prison Mike, keeping it up. He's saying Jagasaw is the left tackle. And that kind of goes like what you're talking about, and what Mike is saying goes to my 2 words: violent versatility, because it doesn't matter which position he plays at, whether it's guard or tackle. And we got to see him do both, obviously, in the college football playoff last year. He's going to play it with violence. He's going to be very physical. He's going to be violent with the hands, like you talked about. And there's going to be a lot of destruction that comes with it. And, look, I realize that, like, the idea is to get the best 5 guys on the field in the best 5 spots. And there are a lot of people who think that Anthony Knapp should be a guard in the way, or maybe even a center. Like all of those things have been brought up. Maybe that happens in the future. I don't know. But they obviously feel like having Jagasaw at right guard and Knapp at left tackle is what gives them, at least for right now, the best opportunity to get the best 5 guys on the field. And you just, like for Anthony Knapp, he just had, a full season plus of experience last year. You're just going to throw that away now? I mean, the way training camps have gone the last couple of years, I don't think that anyone has necessarily got a position locked up going into camp. We've seen some surprises the last couple of years. But Jagasaw, regardless of which position that you play him at, violent versatility. He can play all over the place and do it with violence, no matter where you play him. That's fine. Brian and I don't have the same opinion on everything. Like, just because Brian has one opinion doesn't mean, like, I've said before that I could, see Anthony Knapp as probably an interior guy. But none of us are the guys who see all of these guys at practice every day. So I don't think that when jobs are on the line, if you make the wrong calls and, if you put the wrong guys on the field, when jobs are on the line, I don't think that like coaches are being biased just to get their favorite guys on the field. And there are too many, there are too many hoops to jump through. Like I said, I think that it's not just the offensive line coach making this decision independent of anybody else. I think the head coach and the offensive coordinator are in on those decisions as well.
I think Sly Fox brings up a really good point here. Knapp went up against 4 first-rounders and held his own. That's why you can't say he was ineffective at left tackle. And I personally, where I stand on this, I don't care where he plays. As long as he's in the starting 5, I think that's doing right by Notre Dame and the whole group. I think that group is better if Anthony Knapp is on the field, whether that's left guard, right guard, left tackle. I really don't care. And at the end of the day, that's not my job, like you were alluding to. And another point that you're alluding to is there's just checks and balances. There's no one decision that a coordinator or a position coach is going to make that doesn't get a final approval by Marcus Freeman.
Right. Exactly. And, so let's say is playing left tackle and Knapp is playing right guard. I mean, there's no guarantee that Knapp is going to be great at right guard, and so you see what I'm saying, like so you move him to guard, then all of a sudden what happens if there are, big issues, like with communication, blocking, the whole thing. And I think that that's why they think that Knapp, especially when you look at his build, is better suited. Why they think he is better suited to be a tackle. Got a couple more offensive linemen. How about Emil Wagner?
I put lean machine for Emil Wagner. He's tall, he's lean. At the end of the day, you know who he reminds me of? I didn't want to say this, but it would make a lot of people mad. Do you know where I'm going with this? Just retired, former Cowboy.
Oh, okay.
I think he plays a lot like Tyron Smith at the end of the day. Tall frame, really lean and athletic for his position. I think he's got great, speed, agileness, again, as an offensive lineman. And I know that, he was someone in high school who I think got some time as a tight end as well. So, again, just kind of shows that overall athleticism, tall frame, lean body. He's not overly big like you would see a traditional offensive line. But I think as he goes on, he'll feel more of that frame. And ultimately, again, he just reminds me a lot of a younger Tyron Smith, someone who's a really fit offensive lineman.
I like that. I hadn't really thought of that comparison, but English class coming back again.
Man,
Mr. Agileness. Did you have agileness or did you lack agility?
I lacked a little agility.
Okay. Somewhere in between. I said Emil Wagner, underrated reliability because, again, like he played the most snaps of anyone on the offense last year, and he was the last guy that we were talking about. He played. I won't say he played great all year. There were some times, like the pass blocking definitely needs to improve. But again, you had two first-time starters at both, tackle positions last year, and you went to the national championship game. So, whether you're talking about Emil Wagner or Anthony Knapp or whoever you want to talk about, it couldn't have been that bad, right? Now, I fully realize that a mobile quarterback and a run-first quarterback help bail them out of a lot of those things, and that is going to be, the pass protection is going to be a much bigger deal this year. But Emil Wagner just brought, great steadiness, great reliability to Notre Dame's offensive line last year, especially for a first-time starter and one that, we weren't talking about, oh, what's going on with Emil Wagner, all that kind of stuff all season long. Last offensive lineman, Gerby Lambert.
Oh, you threw me a curveball.
Why did I throw you a curveball?
You go first on this one. I'll explain later.
Okay. Well, I went with future force because I think that Gerby, a lot of us think that like if Gerby Lambert had been healthy, the conversation about Anthony Knapp would be a lot different heading into fall training camp because Knapp is the healthy guy now, and Lambert at least is going to be out, for some extent. And Tenzin is saying future prodigy. John is saying big train. Michael is saying first rounder. A lot of praise for a guy who's been here for a year and a half, or not a year and a half, for a year and hasn't seen the field yet. Future All-American, says ICBM. He is a future force. He's going to be a force on this offensive line. It's a matter of when, not if. And it's just unfortunate that the injury that he suffered has set him back, and he is going to be out for a little bit. The injury that he suffered to his shoulder in the spring.
So the reason you tricked me is because Styles Prescott was next on the list, and that's who I was ready for. And then we jumped the line to Gerby Lambert, and for my words for
do you go ahead, Styles Prescott? I mean, I was trying to save you because I felt like that was the hardest one since
it was the hardest one. It was the hardest one, so I appreciate it. The word I'm going to use for Gerby Lambert is diesel engine. And I think he's just a straight up diesel out there. I know we haven't seen, a whole lot of him in play yet, but when you read about him, they talk about his athletic build, his natural athleticism on the field, and really the things that are mainly highlighted is his physical nature and just the way that he manhandles and overmatches his competition. And they really talk about his ability to win in leverage, and to also, like, when he engages, he's not going to disengage. Like, at the end of the day, when he gets his hands on you, it's pretty much game over. Like, you got to find a new way. And so when you think of someone as big as him, as agile as him, as strong as him, I just think he's a diesel engine along that offensive line.
All right. I like it. Diesel engine, but again, it's going to take a little time as he comes back from the injury. And, because you've got Gerby Lambert out there, depending on what happens with Knapp, again, like things could amplify once the season starts, depending on, like what happens with him. And, is Gerby going to see the field and all that different kind of stuff? I mean, unfortunately, we found out last year that injuries do happen. And I think that we're going to see, some other guys who do, even if they don't start the season, are going to end up out there at offensive line. All right, let's go to the receivers. Jaden Greathouse.
Jaden Greathouse, my two words are going to be just plain and simple, wide receiver one. And the reason why I'm saying wide receiver one is he's got to be the lead wide receiver of this entire room this season. Like, I know that there's, depth charts to the slot receiver and the outside wide receiver and the X and Y and Z and et cetera. But at the end of the day, he has to be wide receiver one of the entire Notre Dame wide receiver position group. You have CJ Carr at quarterback now. I think the offensive playbook is going to open. You teased a lot of people to end the season, between Penn State, Ohio State, and really just kind of his play throughout the entire playoffs. So for me, it's just he's got to be the lead wide receiver in this room. He's got to be the guy that takes them to the next level.
Mike says Fields will be wide receiver one. I think it's going to be like 1A, 1B. I think both of these guys are going to see a lot of action, like Claypool Boykin type stuff, and maybe even better, than what they did when they were together out there. I think that that's kind of the way that this offense is going to look. I think they're both going to have really, really big years. And for Greathouse, I felt like you had to include something great. It can't be the great one, or I guess you could just say great one, if Salty was here. But I just went with great expectations because I feel like the way he finished last season with back-to-back 100-yard receiving games, first time that's happened for a Notre Dame receiver in a million years, it feels like. The expectations are high on him. Like, look at the way you just talked about him. Like, he's got to be wide receiver one. And, that, like, you expect him to be the guy, who can kind of put the team on his back at times with his receiving skills and, everything else. So I just think that there are great expectations. I think he's going to have a monster year myself. And, Toonsa says he thinks he's going to feast. And that takes us to Malachi Fields. Actually, Malachi Fields will be next. Jordan Faison is the next guy.
This one was fun. I'm going to go Golden Corvette for Jordan Faison. And the reason I'm going Golden Corvette is obviously he plays for Notre Dame, so he's going to be golden. I couldn't think of another color that made more sense, and I needed a second word, so Golden Corvette became my word. And the reason why I'm going Corvette is just he's an athletic freak. And we all know him for his incredible speed, the ability to make cuts downfield, and just his overall athleticism. And I mean, we all know he's a two-way player, plays lacrosse, plays football. And again, the reason why he's so effective on the football field, he's like a little Corvette out there, man. He's shifting gears. He's, making cuts on a dime. He's catching the ball. He's making a cut and taking off. And so for me, he just reminds me of a little shifty golden Corvette out there just zipping around.
Yeah, I had a hard time with this because like the dual sport thing and the whole thing. I just went with shifty skills because like the guy is skilled. The guy, like he played quarterback in high school and he came in as a walk-on receiver who was going to play on the lacrosse team. Hadn't played lacrosse yet for Notre Dame. Like you would have thought that this guy was a receiver his whole life. He is skilled. He is versatile. He can do so much. He's got great speed, great hands as well. And like, I think that he is also going to be, like a big factor in this offense. I don't know how many guys we can say that about. I do feel like Greathouse and Fields are going to be the top two, but Faison's got a lot of skills and he's going into his junior season now. And, would like to see him be able to stay fully healthy this year because that's really the only thing that limited him. I think last year was the fact that, he was kind of bugged, by some injury over the course of the season with that ankle that he had. Now Malachi Fields.
So I found the perfect comparison for him, and I hope everyone gets it. I'm trying to do something here that's maybe a little bit more popular because we haven't seen a ton of Malachi Fields yet. I just went with Nico Collins 2.0. And for those who don't know, Nico Collins is a wide receiver for the Houston Texans. He's an outside wide receiver, big frame, strong hands, really fast, and is having, quite the breakout career. And that's a lot of what reminds me of Malachi Fields, just his big frame, strong hands, and deceptively fast speed for, again, how big he is at the end of the day. And so I think he's a true outside wide receiver for Notre Dame, and really something that reminds me a lot of, and maybe this was a better one, Michael Floyd 2.0. Just, again, a strong outside physical wide receiver that Notre Dame needs. They have some of those kind of shiftier, faster guys between Faison, Jaden Greathouse, but when you're talking true size, speed, and power, that's where Malachi Fields comes in.
And so what were your words again?
Nico Collins 2.0, Michael Floyd.
No, but
2.0.
what were your initial two words for him?
Oh, I guess I didn't really have one, but I would just call him a tree trunk.
Tree trunk. Okay. Definitely kind of describes his body. I mean, he is a big guy. And I just went with proven threat because like this is a guy who over the last
probably
two
a lot
seasons,
better.
Over the last 2 seasons, he's had over 800 yards and 55 catches and 5 touchdowns in each season. Like, and that's at Virginia. You think Notre Dame would take that kind of production for a wide receiver? And, again, that's why people like Mike and some other people think that Fields is going to come in and, like he's going to be the guy. But I think that I think that these receivers are going to feast in this offense this year with the difference in, who they're going to have throwing them the football this season. And Fields is going to be a difference maker because he is a proven threat. That's why people are, from the minute that this year's draft was over, you had people already talking about him potentially as a first-round pick next year. I don't know if, maybe you need to tamp the brakes on that a little bit. But he's a proven threat, and like guys like him and guys like Will Pauling, who we'll talk about here in a second, like they are the reason that like maybe people need to be a little more patient as we wait for some of this wide receiver recruiting to catch up, even though it's starting to point in the right direction right now. Proven threat, though, Malachi Fields. And how about Will Pauling? He's next.
For Will Pauling, I just put Swiss knife. And the reason why I think he's kind of like that Swiss knife is if you look at his stats, he spent his first 2 years at Cincinnati, last 2 years at Wisconsin. His first 2 years, he had 11 combined receptions for like 150 yards. And then his last 2 years, he's got, basically around 1,300 yards for 9 touchdowns. I just see him as kind of being that versatile guy that you can throw anywhere. I think he'll make an impact, kind of as a 2 deep guy in the wide receiver room. I think he might make some headway on maybe some special teams, that sort of situation. But I think he's just kind of like that jack of all trades guy. Not a lot of expectations, but you can plug him here and there and be someone that the coaches can naturally rely on. Again, he's not going to be that star player or, the Jaden Greathouse or the Malachi Fields, but he's going to get the job done and someone that you can trust at the end of the day, and a guy that, again, you can kind of plug in maybe on some special teams, maybe on some different, wide receiver packages. And so, again, I think he's like a Swiss knife.
I went under radar. Couldn't say under the radar because that would be 3 words, but under radar because, like I talked about, great expectations for Jaden Greathouse, and Toonsis, 0 expectations for Will Pauling. And that kind of seems to be the general vibe around him because we haven't had the opportunity to see a whole lot of him yet. But he had again, like when you look at his numbers, just a little bit lower than like what Malachi Fields had at Virginia, 116 catches and over 1,200 yards in his last 2 years at Wisconsin. And he only played in 9 games last year because of injury. So he did, obviously, he was recruited by Mike Brown and has played for Mike Brown before, but the expectations are relatively limited for him. But like you, I feel like that he's going to be a pretty good factor and also bring another veteran presence to this team as well. How about Cam Williams?
This one was tough, but I'm just going to put expectations building. I feel like every time we talk about Cam Williams, there's expectations on expectations, and they continue to build. But we just haven't seen quite the results we want out of Cam Williams yet. And I think this is going to be a common theme. And unfortunately, there's a lot of talent in that wide receiver room currently slotted ahead of him. And I think this is kind of a make or break season for him at the end of the day. I think he needs to make some strong headway in the depth chart. It doesn't necessarily need to be a starter, but it at least needs to be in that, I think, 2 or 3 deep rotation area if we want to kind of alleviate some of those expectations that are starting to build for him.
Yeah, hopefully crack the rotation a little bit. And he felt like he was part of that, like he just needs, it sounds like, a little bit more consistency, clean things up, make sure, his focus is where it needs to be. My 2 words for him, interesting that we both have expectations among our 2 words. I have impatient expectations because everyone from the outside has these impatient expectations of Cam Williams because of the fact that he's a top 50 receiver. And, like every time Notre Dame gets one of these highly touted guys, it's like, well, when is he going to see the field? He's got to get on the field right now. He's supposed to be good. He's a top 50 guy. He should be out there right now. What's going on with this guy? Just let the consistency continue to build. I think that's where he is. And to what Toonsis says and what, God's Nuclear ICBM say, still learning, keep working. I think that's where it's at for Cam Williams. And hopefully some of that is happening over the course of the summer when those guys get out there and they're throwing and catching and all that kind of stuff together. Last receiver, Micah Gilbert. Oh, actually, he's not the last receiver, but Micah Gilbert.
I think he's a bit, I'm going to put under radar. I'm going to put under radar. I don't want to put the in there because I think everyone's going to get mad at me if I put under the radar. But, I just think that for Micah Gilbert, he's under radar because I just think naturally, like him and Cam Williams are in pretty similar spots, but it seems like all the expectations are on Cam Williams. I think Micah Gilbert, in terms of these young wide receivers, is a bit more under the radar and kind of just like on the verge of kind of like popping or exploding essentially, right? And I think his time is naturally going to come, but I just think he's moving in a little bit more silence at the end of the day. He's kind of in those shadows a little bit more in comparison to Cam Williams. And so I'm just going to put under radar for now. Again, another young guy who I think has a lot of tremendous talent and the sky's the limit. He's just kind of has to get everything to jive at the end of the day and be someone who can go out there and have a consistent rep every time.
Swandong is questioning 2 under the radar guys
But
or
I
under radar
only
guys. I know. I
said
was getting
under
ready
the
to say
radar.
that. I had an under radar guy. This is your under radar guy. So we're allowed to have, again, we're allowed to have different thoughts for each guy. And we do typically have different thoughts for each guy. Mine is a little bit different. I said physical infatuation because, like, this guy is built. And, again, like, I think that there is a relative amount of good, like, expectation on this guy. Again, like, why didn't he see the field maybe more often last season? Because of he's got the physical attributes and everything else. And like, if I can get to it, Toonces says he's the dude. I mean, a lot of people think that this is the guy right now and should be out there more. Now, we didn't get to see as much of him in the spring because of his finger injury. We saw him later in the spring, but like, he's got a really good chance to be in that top 6 in the wide receiver rotation as well. But people are very infatuated with both Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams because of the tools that they've got. Now the last wide receiver, Elijah Burris.
I have two different sets of 2 words that I think could work for Elijah Burris. I think one of them would be young gun, and the other one would be tremendous spring. And I think they kind of go hand in hand because I think his spring in terms of young wide receivers was the best out of the entire group. And I think he's applying pressure to that younger wide receiver group of Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, etc. Of, I'm a young gun in here, but I can still play football, like, and he showed that he had a really good spring. I loved kind of the way that, he works in contested ball situations. He always kind of finds a way to win the ball, which I think is very important for wide receivers. But again, like, for me, out of Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, and Elijah Burris, I'm actually most excited about Elijah Burris at the moment, to be honest with you. And again, that's why I'm kind of labeling him the young gun of the group.
Yeah, I mean, he gave us more reason to be up on him based on the production that we saw in the spring. Now, again, Gilbert was hurt, so he wasn't out there as much. But in the opportunities that we had at the end of spring, Burris was the guy who was making more plays than a guy like Cam Williams, for example. Deep threat is what I've got for him because, like, I feel like as a freshman, there are enough like fully formed wide receivers who we've already talked about: Greathouse, Pauling, Fields, and Faison. Like, you've got 4 guys right there. Elijah Burris, I think, can come out and take off on a go route and be able to hit a home run every now and then. So deep threat. Maybe it's the cheap and easy way, but that's what I went with. And yeah, I mean, there's obviously just a ton of potential there as well. Like, you also don't want to get, like, too completely wound up on what you saw in the spring, because as we talked about in the spring, there are plenty of guys who show it in the spring and then you don't see it for a little while. Don't know that that's going to happen with Burris, but there's a lot there. And I think that, at the very least, he's a guy who, who can help him take the top off the defense a little bit. Okay, now some tight ends to finish things up. Eli Raridan.
I'm going to go boom, boom, breakout potential, or you could say breakout star. I think he's going to be the next tight end, to come out of this room. I know Mike Denbrock had some nice things to say about him. I just think it's his time. And we know the longstanding tradition of tight ends at Notre Dame. And I think that Eli Raridan is the next man up in that lineage.
Untapped potential is mine, because obviously he's dealt with some injuries since he's been here, only has 16 catches in his first couple of years. But I think that we are going to see a true breakout season from, I almost said Cal Rudolph, and God's nuclear ICBM says Rudolph clone. I mean, like, they wear the same number, obviously, but I think we're going to see a big breakout season from Eli Raridan. How about Kevin Bauman, the old graybeard? on the team right now?
I'm gonna call him the zone eater. And the reason why I'm gonna call him the zone eater is I think he's got really, really good hands. Can catch the ball really well in traffic. Has great natural size and toughness. But I think his best ability is kind of finding those weak spots in the zone, sitting down, and just kind of ultimately being that nice security blanket, possession wide receiver for the quarterback. And so I'm going to go zone eater because I think he can find the holes in the zone.
Yeah, mine. I mean, that's better than mine. Mine is injury marred. Because that's the unfortunate thing about Kevin Bauman. It's like every time it feels like he's going to have a chance. He's been hurt again, and he's gone through so many injuries since he's been here at Notre Dame, and it's like kind of he's one of those guys who feels like he's been around for 10 years at this point. But knock on wood, hopefully he can stay healthy this year, because if he does, then I think that a lot of those things that you talked about, he can be very effective in this offense this season. How about the Arkansas transfer, Ty Washington?
So for Ty Washington, this one is a bit tougher. He's obviously he's coming from Arkansas. Doesn't have a whole lot of stats. I like his frame. 6'5", 250. I'm just going to call him the security blanket at the end of the day, because I think that's exactly why he was brought into this tight end room, is knowing the injuries that have kind of plagued, Raridan and Bauman. He's that security blanket at the end of the day where you can rely on him to kind of step up. And that's not to say that, that room is completely open. Like Ty Washington could be the starter and he could be utilized in packages as a starter. Don't get me wrong. But I just think he's the ultimate, security blanket, and getting a tight end from the SEC with his overall athleticism, size, and ability, I think is a good kind of backup plan to have if it comes down to it.
Yeah. And I think that, so what were your two words?
Security blanket.
Security blanket. I like that. Interesting inclusion was mine, just because here's a guy who was injured a couple of years ago at Arkansas. He was dismissed in midseason last year from the team. While Luke Hass was the top tight end at Arkansas, but you obviously bring him in because of what you talked about. You've got the first two tight ends we talked about have both had multiple injuries before, and you've got another tight end who was injured, so it makes sense to bring in a guy who's got some experience. You bring him in, and he definitely gives you some extra security. He's also got another season of eligibility, so I think that he makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, he doesn't have a ton of production from his time at Arkansas, and he did, end up kind of being shown the door there. It sounded like due to some frustration that he had, but he played in 21 games and had 14 overall receptions for 212 yards in his time, 3 seasons at Arkansas, but he'll have 2 seasons remaining here. All right, so that's that. We did defense last week. We did offense this week. 2 words for every Notre Dame offensive player this week. Did you finish it better than you thought you would?
I found this to be a much more easier exercise in the defensive side of the ball. I think I only struggled with a couple of the younger linemen and some of the wide receivers we haven't seen too much of yet, but we got through it, and an hour and 10 minutes later, here we are.
Here we are. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do this thing.
Fill in the blank. A Penn State writer wrote an article about how Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame beat James Franklin and Penn State to get commitments from Pennsylvania stud recruits Joey O'Brien and Grayson McHugh, as well as Kari Adams out of Maryland. It's blank that the headline to this article is "The Penn State-Notre Dame football rivalry is back."
It's misleading because the rivalry isn't necessarily back. Notre Dame is just taking Penn State and others recruits at the end of the day. Just because Notre Dame played recently in a meaningful game, and now Notre Dame is kind of stomping all over Penn State's recruiting grounds, doesn't mean that a rivalry is back. And so I think this is very misleading at the end of the day. So I guess I'm curious what your word is.
I think it's hilarious that they're calling this a rivalry. Because, now granted, was it a close game in the Orange Bowl? Sure, it was. It came right down to the wire, an interception and a field goal. But like, if anything, maybe the head coaches have a little rivalry going. After because like the guy does mention, like the shots, like the little jabs that James Franklin made during the pregame press conference before the Orange Bowl and how Freeman didn't like it. And he told his team to go out there and play angry in the Orange Bowl. But this is not a rivalry. It's not a rivalry when you're getting your butt kicked. I mean, maybe you're getting, like maybe you're ticking Penn State fans off and you're ticking James Franklin off, but it's anything but a rivalry right now. Notre Dame has won the most recent and most important game that these two teams have played in a long time. And Marcus Freeman and his staff just went into Pennsylvania, and Maryland is obviously just outside Pennsylvania as well, and cleaned James Franklin's clock. So it's anything but a rivalry. But again, I understand why Penn State would be fired up about it, why James Franklin would be fired up about it. But I think it's hilarious that they're even trying to wrap this as some kind of rivalry, because it's not a rivalry right now, because all Notre Dame is doing is winning against Penn State, whether it's on the field or on the recruiting trail, obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, the last time, I just had it. Notre Dame and Penn State haven't played since what, 2007,
I believe, before last year.
Right, yeah, 2007. And before that, they played a home and home in 2006 and 2007. And before that, the last time that they played was 1992, And so from like 1981 to about 1992, they played just about every year. So that 10 or 11 years might have been considered a rivalry, but it's no longer a rivalry, And my lifetime for 30 years, Notre Dame has only played Penn State 3 times, and one of them was last season in a playoff game. They're not rivals. I think the biggest issue here, the biggest issue is Penn State, I feel, and this is my personal opinion, Penn State feels like they're very similar to Notre Dame in terms of program. Independence, Midwest, probably get a lot of criticism for not winning the big game, still competitive, still, a very respected program. I think what has Penn State so bitter, Notre Dame jumped them, like Notre Dame has passed them. And I think that really bothers Penn State is we've been very similar programs. Penn State hasn't found a way to get over the hump. Notre Dame Brian Kelly and Notre Dame parted ways. And now Marcus Freeman has brought them over the hump. James Franklin hasn't gotten Penn State over a hump yet, in my opinion. They're just consistently the same team every year. Notre Dame just went to a national championship and beat some really good teams along the way. Penn State has never done that. And I think there's a lot of anger and animosity building up on the side of Penn State just because of how regionally close we are. And again, how there's a lot of parallels between the programs. And so when a team starts to pull at it ahead of you in this kind of horse race, I think naturally you get angry and say, oh, we're rivals. And, now Notre Dame is beating us. So that's just kind of where I went or where my thought process is.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously both they used to be major independents at the same time until Penn State decided to join the Big Ten. And you look back, and it's interesting, again, in this article, it was an SI, for the Penn State SI site. This guy mentioned, Penn State apparently called it the 12-year war. At least that's what Jay Paterno, who used to be on the staff there, of course, under Jopa, they apparently he called it the 12-year war. I've never heard it referenced that way before, when Notre Dame and Penn State played every year from 1981 to 1992. And when did the series end? It ended when Penn State went to the Big Ten, of course. But yeah, I think it's a stretch. And, we didn't even mention the fact that all the things that we talked about, winning on the field, winning the recruiting battles, Marcus Freeman also lost a great running backs coach. And so what did he do? He went and he plucked another great one, J1 Sider, from James Franklin's staff out there. at Penn State. So a lot of dubs for Marcus Freeman. Toonsa says Penn State has no rivalries in the Big Ten, but Notre Dame is one. Again, I don't think you can call this any kind of a rivalry. Do you buy or sell scheduling Penn State more often in the future?
Yeah, I buy this. I've said before I would like Notre Dame to kind of regularly find kind of a regional Big Ten opponent, whether that's Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State, or if it's the combination of all three. You play each team 2 years, home and home, and then you move on to the next one, and then you constantly kind of cycle between those three teams. I don't care how you do it or what team it is, whether it's one team, a combination of 2 or 3 teams, but I'd like Notre Dame to play a regional Big Ten opponent, and I wouldn't mind if it's Penn State.
I'd still rather have Michigan or Ohio State on the schedule than Penn State. For the most part, I wouldn't mind, but it would have to be, again, like in some kind of rotation. I feel like it probably does it more for Penn State than it would for Notre Dame at this point because of all the stuff that we have talked about. Notre Dame's already winning the recruiting battles right now in James Franklin's backyard. I mean, those are supposed to be like those Pennsylvania players are supposed to be the priorities for them in recruiting, and they just, got their butt whooped. So if Marcus Freeman can go in there and win those kind of recruiting battles without playing Penn State, with the exception of in the playoff last year, save it for the playoff, beat him in the playoff if that's where you play him. So I would not put it as any kind of priority to add Penn State to the schedule. Fill in the blank after the commitment of 6'4", 215-pound tight end Austin Frizzell today. Marcus Freeman's now 20-player 2026 recruiting class is blank.
Star-studded. I think that Marcus Freeman is just continuously stacking up these big-time recruits. Now up to the number of 20 players. We saw over the weekend some of these big names that he was getting. We were warned last week that it felt like a Notre Dame kind of avalanche per se was coming, and he keeps finding a way to stack up all of these stars. And so to me, this is a star-studded class, and I think we're really starting to see what Marcus Freeman is best at. He's a natural recruiter and a developer of players, and now he's a head coach on top of that. And so, this thing is full steam ahead. And if you are, a Notre Dame fan and you got excited about last year, I think you should be even more excited about what's coming in the future, because we've said it before, the national championship was premature. And if you start looking at some of these recruiting classes that Marcus Freeman continues to stack on top of, the winning that they're now accomplishing, because that's ultimately what attracts recruits at the end of the day, is when you start winning games, you're on the national stage, you go play in a national championship, recruits take note of that. They want to play for national championships. They want to play for a good head coach, and they want to feel like they have an opportunity to go, play in the NFL. And I think Marcus Freeman checks all those boxes, and his recruiting classes are reflections of that.
It is seismic for all the reasons that you mentioned there. And, like things were kind of at a lull there for a while, and people were panicked that run to the national championship game wasn't going to have impact. But between getting them on campus a little bit more than a week ago, and just everything that they're doing in all different parts of the country, they're getting elite guys across the board in all these different positions, whether it's running back or defensive line, defensive end, secondary now, like O'Brien, 5-star guy, and all these different guys from across the board. It is seismic, and it's just like we haven't seen the last of it. It's not done yet. There's a lot more coming. This could end up being, it's only been 4 years, but it's looking like this will end up being Marcus Freeman's best class yet. And I think that they're just going to keep stacking even bigger and better classes on top of it as we go forward.
At what point do we start bringing up the lifetime contract? I mean, seriously.
Got to win a national championship first.
Oh, I'm ready to commit to it.
Win a national championship, blank check, right?
I guess he just did get the mega extension.
Going back to the Penn State question about scheduling, he says, is that with or without the USC game?
Sorry, I can't take when you bring Swandong
I know
on the screen seriously.
Wish you would do something about that, Swan Dong.
Change the picture.
At least put like a black space over it or something.
I think regardless of if USC is on the schedule or not, my answer still kind of holds true. I think, and naturally, if USC decides to go their own way and phases their way out of the schedule, I think that's even more reason to kind of bring on one of those regional Big Ten rivalries.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a fun Thanksgiving weekend game. I don't know. There is a question as we look at scheduling if USC is off the schedule, like does Notre Dame even want, because like we've talked before about Notre Dame should get to host USC for Thanksgiving weekend and the cold weather and all that kind of stuff. Does Notre Dame even want to host, that game Thanksgiving weekend because the students are gone and all that because it's Thanksgiving weekend, and all that different kind of stuff. But I mean, there's a lot of things that have to be figured out at the very least. I would agree. Like that would be in addition to USC because it's not like you're so concerned about USC and then adding something on top of that, that like, Penn State is not going to be doable. There are plenty of schedules in the future where there would be, a spot for Penn State, I think potentially, as well as USC and whoever else is on the schedule. Fill in the blank. Since the advent of NIL, the number of men's college basketball players declaring early for the NBA draft has dropped from 363 4 years ago to just 106 this year, with 51 of those players ultimately deciding to return to school rather than go pro. This is good for blank.
This is good for college basketball, and it's good for the development of young basketball players. I feel like, a lot of these guys that decided, to commit to the NBA draft early was, how can I get a paycheck at the end of the day, right? And so the NIL or the advent of NIL has kind of neutralized that because now these guys don't feel the pressure to go on to the NBA like it's like a make or break situation, right? And like a lot of those guys probably feel like, well, if I don't go this year, when is my year going to be, right? Or like this moment could pass me up and then I'm ultimately stuck. I just think that this really encourages college players, one, to stay in college and, to me, the most important part, get the degree taken care of, but two, also find a way to kind of get some of those financial needs met so you don't feel the pressure to go on to the NBA. And I think ultimately this will lead to a better product for the NBA because I think you're going to get more polished players coming into the draft, more mature players coming into the draft, and guys who don't have to spend as much time in the G League or overseas before they're ready to be an NBA starter.
Yeah, I think it is good for basketball, period. Not just college basketball. It is good for college basketball. It's great for college basketball, but it is also good for the NBA because of what you talked about, because guys are going to be more developed. But like my interest in the men's college game had really like been steadily falling off because of one and done. And, because of the fact that even if it wasn't one and done, it's two and done. Guys were bolting as soon as they could to get to the league. And then most of them just end up playing for a G League team, or end up in Europe or whatever. This is really good for men's college basketball because like now you're still going to have transfer portal. So that's going to, like some of the cohesion and stuff like that won't be there. But in general, like the overall fundamentals of the college basketball game, which, like stereotypically is what most people like. The fundamentals are stereotypically what most people have associated with the college game for a long time. And I see people like Joe knocking the NBA. The fundamentals in the NBA are better right now than they've been in a long time because the best players in the college game have gone to the NBA. And so like you may not like that product and that's fine. I'm not trying to sell you on the NBA by any means, but I think the fundamentals in the college game are going to get a lot better. Aesthetically, it's going to look a lot better because of the fact that you've guys, got guys staying around longer and playing longer. And I think that ultimately that's going to be good for the NBA as well.
I think an underrated aspect of this as well is, there's a lot and it's self-inflicted, I guess you could say. But there's a lot of pressure on those, one and done guys coming out of coming out of college and playing in the NBA because they're so young, but the expectation level is so high. Like
Yeah.
if you're a lottery pick, you're expected to basically fix all those teams' problems as an 18 or 19-year-old at the end of the day. So I just think, again, a big part of this is the mental maturity that comes along with being a successful NBA player. I think alleviating some of that pressure for 18 and 19-year-olds to feel like they have to change an NBA franchise just because they're a lottery pick is also going to help out a lot as well.
I was going to ask you about it. Well, like for people who knock the NBA, and again, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. But like the two teams that we just saw, like when you talk like OKC and Indiana playing each other in the finals, like, we talked about, again, like they both had stars. Halliburton for Indiana, SGA, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander for Oklahoma City, budding superstars, both of them. So they both had stars, but like most teams that win championships have at least two, if not three, of those caliber players. They both of those teams played a very good fundamental brand of basketball, in Oklahoma City specifically with their defense. That's ultimately what won the series. Now, the Halliburton injury, and we can kind of talk about it here real quickly. Do you put any kind of asterisk next to OKC's title because of the Halliburton injury in the first quarter last night?
No. Injuries are part of the season.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a long grind. I mean, if we're going to play that game, you could go back to, when the Raptors won their championship with Kawhi. They had a lot of, things break their way on that playoff run in terms of injuries as well. It's just, it sucks. And, it feels like you're not beating a team full strength. But again, that's just, part of the process at the end of the day. You can still kind of overcome those things. I will say, though, I would hate to be an NBA player wearing the number 0 in the NBA playoffs. Damian Lillard, Jason Tatum, and Halliburton all tore their Achilles. All wear number 0. All played in the playoffs.
And what's even, like the two things are, I mean, one, just suffering that kind of injury. And, then you had idiots like Bayless, who was questioning whether he was really hurt before the game. And of course, anytime Skip Bayless says something, I guess you could probably just sit back because it's going to blow up in his face because it's so idiotic. And then this was the risk of Halliburton trying to play, and he went out there and he played in game 6 and he got through it okay. And like was off to a great start last night. And then unfortunately something like this happens. And now like he's going to be out all of next season.
That's the worst part, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is these guys are now out for the entire next season. And, I was playing softball last night in scorching temperatures, by the way. And
it's summer. Get used to it.
Like 30 minutes into the game, everyone's talking about how he, tore his Achilles and all this stuff. And, some of these, I just hate hearing stuff like this. But some of these guys were like, well, that's what you get for playing on an injured calf. And it's like, really? Because you'd be dogging him if he was sitting out saying he's soft and not tough enough.
Exactly.
Oh, his calf hurts. It's just, I hate people who are like, I told you so when it comes to injuries,
yeah,
it's game 7 of the freaking NBA finals. Did you think he was not going to play?
Right. Because now, for him too, is like, and for the Pacers, for that matter, you got all the way to game 7 of the NBA finals and you were up at a halftime. And, like for either one of them, you don't know that you're going to ever get this far again. Like even like to the NBA finals, let alone to game 7 of the NBA finals.
And you just have to feel so bad for Halliburton because like as a competitor and as an athlete, like just has to be the worst feeling in the world because of what you just talked about, like feeling like, okay, it's game 7. We've been the underdogs this entire playoffs. We're up at halftime. What if I didn't get hurt? What if I was able to finish that game? And so not only does that loom on his mind, But now the entire, next season of not being able to play is also on his mind. So just a gruesome injury, and, you just hope he can get back as soon as possible.
Yeah. Toonces wants to know, I really don't have an NBA team. I just generally watch. I liked watching the Knicks because of Jalen Brunson this year. I wasn't necessarily pulling hard for, I wanted him to win to some extent because I wanted him, to see him keep playing. I wasn't disappointed that the Pacers won, but I don't really have an NBA team. I've always to me, it comes down to style of play. I like the style of play of both teams, Oklahoma City and Indiana. I've always liked the style of play of Golden State since Steph has been there. Again, it's not like I'm a Golden State fan, but that was always a team that I would watch. Jesse, do you consider yourself a Cavs fan since you are in Cleveland and you've been to some games?
So that will kind of be where my answer goes. Growing up, I really wasn't huge into basketball or the NBA simply because I just wasn't good at basketball. I was more of a football and baseball player. But I naturally started to appreciate basketball more so when I got into high school and definitely when I got into college. So this is going to make a lot of people mad, but the reason why I got into basketball was because of LeBron James. I thought he was a great player. And so for the longest time, I called myself a LeBron James fan. I rooted for any team that he played for because I liked watching him play. And then naturally, as I kind of, developed more feelings and independent thoughts for basketball, I would say that the Cavs have kind of grown into my team just because I have an appreciation for basketball. The Cavs play really good basketball. And, living in Cleveland, we had season tickets last year. We go to a lot of games. So I guess that would make me a Cavs fan.
Okay. All right. The reaction has not been as strong as I thought it would when you said that. So, there it is, Joe. You found out who he really was then. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. Coastal Carolina head coach Kevin Schnall and his first base coach Matt Schilling both ejected in the first inning of the College World Series Finals against LSU yesterday. It all started when Schnall went to the top step of the dugout in the first inning, gestured at home plate umpire Angel Campos with 3 fingers, and began yelling at him. The NCAA says Schnall was ejected for arguing balls and strikes. He'll also serve a 2-game suspension to begin next season because another umpire tripped over Schnall's foot, but Schnall was accused of bumping the umpire. So here is Coastal Carolina head coach Kevin Schnall afterwards. You get the question first and the answer afterwards.
28th pitch of the first inning. Were you warned prior to it? And then I know the home plate umpire kind of turned his back and walked away. Were any words shared from him to you afterwards?
There's 25,000 people there, and I vaguely hear a warning issued. As the head coach, I was assistant for 24 years, and as an assistant, you're almost treated like a second level citizen, and you can't say a word. Now, as a head coach, I think it is your right to get an explanation of why we got warned. And I'm 48 years old. I shouldn't get shooed by another grown man, right? So when I come out to ask what the warning is, a grown man shooed me. So at that point, I can now hear him say, it was a warning issued for arguing balls and strikes. And at that point, I said, because you missed 3. At that point, ejected. If that warrants an ejection, I'm the first one to stand here like a man and apologize. 2 words that define our program are own it. And what does that mean is you have to own everything that you do without blame, without defending yourself, without excuses. If you guys watched the video, there was a guy that came in extremely aggressively, tripped over Campos's foot, embarrassed in front of 25,000, immediately goes 2-game suspension and said, bumping the umpire. Immediately does that. There was no bump. He was embarrassed. I shouldn't be held accountable for a grown man's athleticism. They'll retract it, though, because now it's excessive. And the reason why it's excessive, because I was trying to say, I didn't bump him. It is what it is. But if that warranted an ejection, man, there'd be a lot of ejections. As an umpire, I feel like it's your job to manage the game, the national championship game, with some poise, some calmness, and a little bit of tolerance.
I can't agree with everything that he said more. I should not be held accountable for another grown man's athleticism. Lack of athleticism, it should be. The guy literally tripped over another guy's feet. Then he bounces up and he's like looking in the stands like, who's watching? Go ahead, Jess.
So, oh my gosh, there's a lot of layers to this.
Let me say this. He came out. His team is batting. He's got a guy at first base. He steals second.
Oh, yeah.
There's a curveball thrown to the guy at the plate. The curveball almost hit the guy in the batter's box, and it was called a strike. This is what set him off. Now, I understand that setting him off, but as he said, it was the third one, and it was only the first inning. The only thing I'll say in the umpire's defense in this, in the umpire's defense, is it is the first inning. You know, like, I don't know if you want to be going nuts in the first inning about balls and strikes, because balls and strikes, as every baseball coach, manager knows, is going to get you run right away. Now, everything else I completely agree with. As the home plate umpire, it's the first inning. You've got to give these guys a little bit of leeway because this is their occupation. They are there to win a national championship. They are competing to win a national championship. So their juices are obviously, going to be flowing a little bit. For Coastal Carolina, they lost game 1. So if they lose that game, which they ended up doing, their season was over. So like, I get it, John. You can't argue balls and strikes, but you've got to have, like, if you listen to the full explanation of everything Schnall was saying there, I completely get where he's coming from. There's 25,000 cheering fans, and 75% of that crowd was, pro LSU, so there was a lot of noise in there. He can barely hear what the umpire is saying. You've got to be a little bit more of a man yourself as Angel Campos, the home plate umpire, not just shoo a head coach away, but at least go engage him in a conversation, have a conversation with him.
Yeah, so I think what you need to know first and foremost about Angel Campos is he was fired 7 years after being an MLB umpire. And there's a reason why he's umpiring college games level and not MLB games anymore. So that's some prior knowledge I think you should have before coming into this kind of conversation. The second thing that needs to be understood here is it's game 2 of the College World Series. Like, everything is on the line for Coastal Carolina at this point. There's a lot of emotions. There's clearly a lot of intensity. And Schnall not getting an explanation for a warning is a disservice. And so to come out and to get that, explanation of your warning and also get run in the same, minute is just an embarrassment at the end of the day. And I think as an umpire, like he was alluding to, you have to understand the moment. That doesn't give the coach the right to just act like a complete jackwagon, but nothing that he did deserved to get run in the first inning of a College World Series game. And I'm just so tired of these umpires being so soft and not thick-skinned that they can't even take a comment from a college coach in the most important game of the season. Like you said, like, these are the moments that these college coaches and players live for. This is what they've built their entire career on. And then you get to the second part of this where guy trips over and immediately he put 2 fingers in the air. And I knew what that meant right away. I knew that meant 2 games, a 2 more game suspension. But he was so embarrassed. He had to let everyone know right away that was another 2 games on top of his ejection.
And literally this umpire tripped over somebody else's feet. There was no contact. It was ridiculous.
the last thing I'll say about this, the only defense I will have for the umpire, and I know this because Nico Horner got run about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He turned around and he told the umpire verbatim, "You're having a bad day," and got run immediately. And no, but Schnall did the same thing of, "You've missed 3 calls." I don't think you can directly use that first person you. That's what's going to get you run in a lot of situations.
When you make it personal, yeah.
When I think he could have said, there's been 3 missed calls or there's been 3 bad calls. But when you directly say you and you're singling out the umpire, that's what's going to get you ejected. At least that was the explanation that Nico Horner got in his ejection, is once he directly said you or you've had a bad game or you've missed 3 calls, that's where I think that's where the umpires, emotions start to get hurt, because you're singling them out to a degree. But, it's a disservice to Coastal Carolina because they're in an elimination game.
Yes.
And now their head coach is out of the game in the first inning. I just think that's completely unacceptable, knowing the gravity of the situation. Again, if he would have went out there and just started dropping F-bombs and got in the guy's face and had a meltdown, sure. But I think he was seeking a conversation, didn't get it, and got even more mad. And then, ultimately we all know what happened.
Campos, the home plate umpire, should have walked up to him and said, "Look, you're arguing balls and strikes with me right now. You know what happens when you argue balls and strikes. So if you want to continue, I'll throw you out of this game. Or we can stop, because this is the championship series and you can stay in this." Something to that effect. That's really all it took. And that took what? All of 15 seconds to say it, rather than telling him, as Schnall was saying, the home plate umpire didn't even want the head coach of Coastal Carolina approaching him to talk about this. That's really all it took. And because, as you said, these umpires get so sensitive when they're challenged on anything. And this is the kind of stuff that happens. Those umpires aren't out there competing for anything. They're supposed to be out there to be basically a stick on the wall, like to call balls and strikes, to call safe or out, to call fair or foul. That's what they're supposed to be out there for. But like, the livelihood of that coach and any coach who goes out there is on the line with every game they're playing, and they're playing for a freaking national championship. I think you could have had a little bit longer leash as an umpire than what they had.
Just unfortunate. And I think it's even more idiotic that he has to serve a suspension next season. Don't you think that getting booted in the first inning of the College World Series is enough?
Right.
And
all the NCAA does, they released a statement. They basically said arguing balls and strikes is an automatic ejection. Okay, we get it. Again, by the letter of the law, the NCAA and the umpire did what they were entitled to do. But I think you have to take, as the coach was saying and as we were saying,
you have to have awareness.
You have to take the circumstances, right? Have a little awareness of the circumstances that you're working in, and have a little leeway.
Listen, if I get fired up over 5th and 6th grade meaningless basketball, I can only imagine how fired up a Division I baseball coach is in a College World Series.
Right. Exactly. Okay, Jesse, you have a parlay that you're thinking about. You've got
that I'm not sharing now with any of these people.
Well, I'm going to share it.
No, my winnings.
Oh, you've got Cubs outfielder Pete Crow Armstrong to win the NL MVP. That's leg 1. Dallas Cowboys to win the NFC East is leg 2. And Jeremiah Love to win the Heisman. That's leg 3. It has plus 240. It has plus 240,260 odds. So a $104 bet would win over $250,000. So you shared this with Vince and I today. Have you actually placed the bet yet?
The bet has not been placed. I was fooling around last night on FanDuel. I was like, I need to build a nice little future to get excited about what can win me a lot of money. And then I was like, let me just take all my favorite teams. And it's the year of 2025. I'm getting married. This is going to be the best year ever. Everything's going to fall my way. That's kind of the thought process on this. I'm getting married. Pete Crow Armstrong's going to win the MVP. The Cowboys are going to win the NFC East. And Jeremiah Love is going to win the Heisman. And so I was like, let me just throw that together and see what kind of odds I can get. And then, like you said, it's plus 240,000, 240 and 200 or
240,260.
260 odds. And then the 104 bet comes from I'm getting married on 10/4, October 4th. That's why I picked $104. That would net me $250,000. I haven't placed the bet yet. I have a lot of bills due right now. I think next time I get paid, I will be placing this $104 bet.
So you're actually going to do it?
I am actually going to do
it. What would you win if you threw just $20 at that?
Take 250 and divide it by 5, so 50,000.
That's not bad. I'd feel more confident in 20, I think, but I guess if you have 104 to win 250,000, which of the 3 legs are you most confident in?
Pete Crow Armstrong to win the MVP.
Really?
Yep.
You think who's got the best odds right now? Is
Ohtani.
It Mookie Betts? Is it Ohtani? Oh, I forgot about Ohtani.
The thing is Ohtani, and I think this is what would favor. This all assumes that obviously Pete Crow continues his slug. He's got like 22 home runs and like 70 RBIs right now. But the thing about him that differentiates him from Ohtani is he's tremendous as a defensive player. He's one of the best center fielders in the game. He adds a ton of defensive WAR. And so if he can have similar hitting stats to Shohei Ohtani and also be the best center fielder in baseball, I don't know how you can not give it to a guy that's, playing both sides of the ball every day. Of course, Ohtani is starting to, gear back up into pitching. So that'll obviously, bolster his resume. But I think of the 3, I feel the least confident about Jeremiah Love just because of the usage stuff that we've talked about. Yeah. But the actual one with the lowest odds is the Dallas Cowboys to win the NFC East. That's at like plus 450. Jeremiah Love to win the Heisman's plus 5,000. And Pete Crow Armstrong to win MVP, I think, is at like plus 800 right now. So the Cowboys do have the shortest odds. And we've talked about this before. I feel good about the Cowboys because I love what they're doing under Brian Schottenheimer. They're getting a lot of pieces back. They added some good offensive weapons. And most importantly, they don't have to play a first-place schedule anymore.
Yeah, and when you look at the fact that no team has repeated as NFC champs
and that's
in
a big
21
part
years,
of it as well.
Like odds, like I can't believe that the Cowboys' odds are so low. Obviously Washington has higher odds, but I think the odds are just as long against them to have a rookie quarterback repeat what he did last year and to have the kind of season that they have last year. So I actually like the Cowboys. Like they've shown when they're not expected to do anything that they can have a division championship type season. Where they've struggled, obviously, is actually winning in the playoffs. It's not getting to the playoffs
right.
In winning divisions. They've won plenty of divisions when they weren't expected to before.
They'll do their work in the regular season. It's just a matter of the postseason. I think you got to bring up. Oh, I didn't know you were going to bring up that one. I like God's nuclear comment here at the end. If you bet $1, you might as well bet 100. That's honestly how I feel sometimes. Like if you're going to put together,
degenerate gambler.
If you're going to put together a crazy parlay, like think about like what's really the difference between $1 and $25 at the end of the day.
Yeah,
right.
But there's a big difference between 25 and 100.
No, that's for sure. But like when you win that bet, and say you only place $1, you'd be like, man, what if I just would have put that 25 on it?
True,
right? Like
true.
No one wants to be in that spot where you hit a crazy bet and you're like, damn, I only put $1 on this. Like you might as well go big or go home and actually freaking win something on it if you're going to place it. That's at least my thought process most of the time.
Okay. I can see the rationale. Everyone's in there telling you to go for it. Why not?
You just want to see me lose money.
Yep. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today. Appreciate you being here, and be sure to hit the like button before you leave. And don't forget, again, we're mixing this week up a little bit. Tomorrow's going to be the mailbag day. Wednesday, we're going to have a special guest on the show, and I'm already working on a guest for next week as well that might have lined up and ready to go. So hit that like button, and we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.